Hello and welcome to Films for the very first time. My name is Jordan. With me, as always, is Casey McGeorge.
How's it going, everybody? That was horrible. That sounded more like a horrible Dracula than an Arnold Schwarzenegger. But
It's going good. I'm excited to talk this movie with you today. What movie are we talking about?
we are watching James Cameron's The Terminator. I'm excited to get to the end to see what your thoughts are about this because this this movie. So, spoiler alert: this is one of the rare movies where the sequel is better than the original, but the original is still pretty good. Like, by no means is the first one a bad movie, but I think universally it will be said that the sequel, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, is way better. Like, we have the modern action movie because of Terminator 2. But in order to get to Terminator 2, we had to have this one. And we don't talk about anything past Terminator 2, really. Like, we'll have to talk about Terminator 3,
Yeah, I was gonna say we will. We will be talking
but
about.
anything past that, most fans pretty much don't talk about that. Like, they don't exist. But I'm excited to see the fact that you're watching these for the first time.
Yeah, this is something that uh, I guess has been on my list for a bit because I had looked it up previously to wonder like where these were all streaming, and then I remembered that they are not all on the same service, and
It's a nightmare because of
yeah,
distribution rights and who owns the rights. And there's
and we
something
and we
about that
kind
we'll
of
talk
talked
about
about.
later.
I think we talked about it. I'm not sure if we talked about it on show or off show, but we talked about it when we were talking about picking this movie, and it was just interesting that I remembered that because like this is also my go-to example when we talk about franchises that kind of just keep getting restarted for no reason. Even though I hadn't seen these, I kind of know that like they'll be like, well, we're bringing a new Terminator, but we're ignoring the fourth film in continuity, and we're going to this movie, and
Yeah.
it's just like a mess. Uh, like
Look, things
compared to some franchises.
things got so bad. This is on Max. I can't remember where Terminator 2 is, but I know you can stream it somewhere.
Paramount, Paramount.
Terminator 3 it's so bad that Terminator 3 at last we checked was free on YouTube. Not like some dude put it up on YouTube. Like, it is
The official
legitimately
account. Yep.
free on the YouTube Movies account. Like, you can just get bored one day and watch Terminator 3 for free on YouTube. That says a lot about many different things. And then, like I said, we don't talk about the other ones, but I can't imagine where the other ones are streaming in so many different places. If they're even streaming at all. Like, I haven't looked, honestly. Just because I don't know if I even want to know.
I think someday I'll watch them all and just see how it gets. But yeah, so we're talking Terminator 1 here. I know that
It's called the Terminator is the
yeah, the
official.
Terminator. So I wanted to specify too that like the whole reason we're really watching this one is like you said to get the T2, and like that was one of the ones you were going to pick, and I was just kind of like, hey, kind of like how you are with the extended edition to Lord of the Rings. Like if we're going to do it, let's do it. So let me watch the first one and kind of see how it
Yeah.
goes, and yeah, so that's what we're diving into.
All right. So, uh, The Terminator by James Cameron. Directed by James Cameron. Written by James Cameron, Gale and Hurd, with additional dialogue by William Wisher Jr. Starring Linda Hamilton, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Michael Bain. Hopefully, I said that name correctly. I may not have. I apologize if I did not. Who frequently has worked with James Cameron on many different films, Aliens, and some other stuff. Released October 26th of 1984. Had a budget of 6.4 million, made 78.3 at the box office. The basic plot line: a human soldier is sent from 2029 to 1984 to stop an almost indestructible cyborg killing machine sent back from the same year, which has been programmed to execute a young woman whose unborn son is the key to humanity's future salvation. 1984. I was 6 years old. Uh, I probably wouldn't have gone to see this in the theater. Um, I'll be honest, my parents were. Well, no, I think this was rated R. I forgot to check the rating on it. Like, it's either a high PG-13 or like rated R. Um,
This is R.
my
Yes.
my mom wasn't really too concerned. Like, I'll be honest, she took me to go, with her and a friend to go see Fatal Attraction in the movie theater. If you haven't seen that, that's definitely not for a child to go see. Um, but I remember seeing it, and we talked about this last week. I don't know if it was on or off air. I remember seeing this either on video, well, both on video cassette, but I remember seeing this on HBO. So back in the day, you had HBO Cinemax. I can't remember what show type in the picture, stuff like that. But movies would run for like 3 to 6 months in the movie theater. They had a lot longer run times back then. When it came out, after it came out, go on beta and VHS. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then back when you had TV guides and like you would look in your local weekly paper to see what was coming on television, right? Like on Sunday or every day you would check to see like what your TV was showing. And HBO would also do advertisements on HBO if you had cable because they would also get movies run for the first time. And it was like every Saturday night. And they would do advertisements for bigger ones up to it for weeks. Saturday, October 1st, the HBO premiere of James Cameron's The Terminator. Blah, blah, blah. You can only watch it here on HBO. And I sent you the video last week that I distinctly remember as a kid of what you used to see when HBO had these world premiere movies. And, the whole HBO feature presentation thing. And that brings me back to my childhood. Like, I'll get on YouTube and I'll watch that every now and then just so I can feel like I'm 8 years old sitting cross-legged style in front of the TV because it was just a great time in my life, even though it was the 80s. And it was a horrible time to be alive. But, so I definitely remember seeing it on HBO. I'm scared to ask. I know the answer, but where were you when this came out?
Like many movies so far, not even alive. So 84, my parents were in high school. My dad graduated in 85, and that's when they started dating, actually. They started dating in 85. Um, so, yeah, and this is one, again, that I've said this a few times. This is one of those movies where I don't think like my parents were super into it. Like my dad wasn't really into sci-fi stuff at all. Um until much later in life. 2015 is really when he started watching Star Wars for like the first time, really. So yeah, and it was mostly because my nephews were really interested in it, and he wanted to kind of bond, with my young nephews and watch it with them, and he kind of started getting kind of more into it around that time in the lead up to Force Awakens and stuff like that. So this was one that I don't think we definitely did not own this movie. So this is one that I never really watched before. The most I know about the whole thing, right, is from pop culture. Anything with pop culture, or like I said, I don't know if I said this again on air or off air, but Universal Studios. Whenever we'd go there, they had a Terminator show that you would walk in and see it. And yeah, I think it was a T2 show, but that was pretty much all I knew about. Like, I knew obviously the names like Sarah Connor, right? John Connor, stuff like that.
And eventually they came out with like the Sarah Connor Chronicles. And
Yes, and I was aware of that. Like I had, I was in high school or college when that show came out, and kind of like I follow, how we did Superstore and stuff. I follow TV news, right? So I follow ratings, and I would just check rating shows. So I knew like when that show was canceled. I knew like when, because I'm just like TV nerd about that kind of stuff. So even though I hadn't watched it, I'm usually like seeing stuff and absorbing stuff through osmosis,
You
about
were
this franchise.
aware of it. You just hadn't
Yeah,
dove into it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know why really. So rated R probably was a big hurdle for me. My parents, I wouldn't say they're strict. Like they weren't one of those people that were like, you can't watch PG-13 until you're 13. Like that, like there's some people that are like that. I didn't really have that issue. Um, I went to see Superbad with my dad in freshman year, right? And I got to see my grandmother took me to see Borat. There's some scenes in Borat that are not very nice, and
I haven't seen Borat. That's the same thing like me.
you have to watch
I'm
that.
aware
Yes,
of it. I'm aware of it. I know some of the pop culture things from it.
that's going on
I
the
know
list.
it is apparently very nice. And I know, have you introduced your wife to Borat? I don't know.
Yes.
But
No, I don't think my wife would like Borat. But yeah, we'll I'll have to add it to the list. But so I guess probably by high school I was able to have watched it or something, but I never owned it. I didn't have any friends that were like super big into Terminator. Like my cousin liked it, but like, and then there wasn't any of like the newer movies coming out at the time where I could watch it. That would like, I would always just hear people talk about how bad the new movies were. So I just kind of like never really that. And then, like I said, I was kind of looking to watch it a couple years ago, and I'm looking at like, okay, what streaming service is it on? It's like this is a mess. Following
in all
which one is on
fairness, I'll
which.
say this. In all fairness, I'll say this. Um, we're kind of doing it the right way. Like, if you're gonna jump into the Terminator series, you can't jump in with like Genesis or Dark Fate, the later
Right, right.
movies. Like, you can't because it does have it's a mess. It does have stuff to do with older ones, but then they change stuff and blah. Like, I don't know, but you kind of got to start from the beginning, so you really do have the basics of what's going on. Like, you could start at Terminator 2. You could have skipped Terminator. Terminator 2 does manage to catch you up with everything that basically happened. You just don't see the story, but they do give you information of basically what happened in this, and then you could go on from there. But like, it's one of those, like, because there's so many, like, if you're gonna do it, you gotta start from the beginning, which what we're doing. And then, like you said, the other ones are so bad, like there's really no reason to jump into it. And then, like, why are you gonna jump in at like why are you gonna jump into a series where, when you hear there's 7 movies in the series or whatever the number is, and only 2 of them are good? Like, in all fairness, like, when you look at the numbers like that, you're like, why would I even bother with this series? You know, and I get that. Like, your mic's off.
Sorry, I was just counting 6 movies.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's 6 movies in the series, and why are you going to jump in when only 2 of them are good? You know,
and I'm sure there will be more.
I doubt it. To be honest, they've had diminishing returns critically and financially, like with each new movie that has come
Hmm.
out. So if they're gonna have more, like, it may be like 10 or 20 years down the road where they reboot the entire franchise, possibly. But like, because I mean, they even brought Linda Hamilton back a couple years ago for one of them.
Yeah,
Schwarzenegger's
that
been
was
in and
for
out.
Dark Fate, right?
You had Christian Bale, who had his rant on one of them. So at this point, like, each each successive movie that's come out, the box office has gone down. The critical reviews have gone down and gotten worse. The fans have started to like them less and less. So at some point, even most studios are like, we gotta stop. Like, we gotta stop trying to milk this property because we're not getting anything back from it.
Well, that's the issue I find with a lot of franchises that don't have like people could probably say the same thing about Star Wars, but at least with Star Wars, like they don't ignore certain things for continuity. Like they have a story group that's in charge of stuff since George left. What I worry about like franchises like this and some that are like that they end up in other people's hands and then they're just like well, now we have to do our film, right? We have to try rebooting it, but we have to ignore the one that was not popular. And then
Yeah,
this movie becomes not popular.
We're gonna skip everything past 4, and then that movie bombs, and another studio gets it. We're
Yeah,
gonna skip
yep.
everything from like 3 instead, and we're
Right.
gonna go back to halfway from part 2, and change it up from there. And then someone else gets it, and they're like, no, 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 we're just gonna go with part 1, and yeah, it's a
Exactly.
nightmare.
And this has become a thing where like at some point you just do have to leave a franchise alone and say, look, that's dead. Right? Like unless if you're going to do what I think some franchises should do, and is if you're going to reboot something, don't like just reboot it and tell the same story, but like you know, and I'm sure they've tried this with this, but like fresh starts with like new characters. But the issue is, it's not popular, right? Because like it's like what I would assume from seeing this first movie is that many people are not that like in love with the world of Terminator, right? Because it's a depressing future. It's that they like the characters of Sarah Connor and they like Arnold's portrayal as this murderous Terminator who in the second film we'll talk about in a couple of weeks gets a little bit of a difference there. But I assume that's why it doesn't work. And then at a certain point they're just kind of done with it.
So you'd be surprised because they touch on in the second one. Like I want to say the date that supposedly the machines came online, like has just recently passed. Like you know how we had Back to the Future Day where it was like what was it June 15th, whatever. Like that was the like
October 15th, 2015. Yeah.
Like yeah, so that was
Or
actually like
October or
Back to the
something.
Future
Yeah.
Day. Yeah. So I want to say within like the last month or so was the actual date that apparently the machines came online and became self-aware and started taking over. And if you look at everything that's happening in the world of AI now and all these AI chatbots and machine learning and all this other stuff, this they might have been off by like 10 or 20 years, but we might be heading down that path. Like this might not have been more. This might have been less science fiction and more of like a bold forewarning to us of like,
Yeah.
hey, quit screwing around. This is what your future's gonna come to. You know.
But I do wonder if like that's interesting to people if they're like we deal enough with that in our real life now where it's like whatever. You know?
I think for some people now it's just maybe they're trying to track it along with like how far things are going with machine learning and AI now as compared to like where it is in the movie. But I mean, yeah, there are plenty of people who are like, yeah, that's where we're headed if you guys don't quit screwing around. But
Right. I want to shout out before we really start digging into Gale and Hurd. I knew I heard the name before, no pun intended. But yeah, she also worked on The Walking Dead, the TV show.
Michael Baine's been in like The Walking Dead because I had to look him up. Like I said, he's been a frequent collaborator with.
He was in Mandalorian as well.
Yeah, he was in The Mandalorian. So also, what's his name from? It also has Lance Henriksen is in it. Is in this movie. We'll get to him. We'll talk about him in a little bit. All right. So the movie starts. It's 1984, the Los Angeles city streets, where I can't remember if everything was really like this. I didn't live in Los Angeles or New York, but anytime you see stuff from like the 70s and 80s in like LA or New York or Chicago, it's dirty, it's grimy.
Yeah.
There's steam coming up from everywhere for whatever reason, which there's steam pipes in New York City because it gets cold there and everything. I don't know why there's a bunch of steam in Los Angeles. Like it doesn't make any sense. But
aesthetic. But I was thinking this too when I was watching it because 84, right, comes out. 85, Back to the Future comes out. My favorite film. Watched that a million times. Now that's not taking place in a city, but just like it's a more bright, optimistic vibe, right? In Back to the Future, and then Terminator seeing this. But like when I was taking a class in high school, and we talked about a certain time of New York, it was this kind of bad in the 70s and 80s. Now I'm not sure like LA, but like
oh no,
it's funny then in
I'm
the
not
90s
New York wasn't bad.
Right.
They
and then
cleaned
in
it
the
up.
90s you get like Friends and Seinfeld, which are very like nothing's going bad in New York, and then they do kind of revitalize New York, in the late '80s or so. But
Well, I listen to a ton of true crime podcasts and various other things because I am a mailman and I'm out there by myself all day, and I'm not supposed to, so nobody heard that. Shh, don't tell nobody. But uh, so yeah, like the '70s and '80s in New York was a horrible time. Don't get me wrong, but and it was very crime ridden. There was a ton of crime in places like that, and eventually they had to clean it up. Like Times Square, if you go back and read stories and listen to like people talk about Times Square back then, it was a horrible place. You would get mugged, you would get robbed. There was a bunch of like porn theaters and porn shops and
yeah,
nudie
yeah,
booths, and there was sex workers and various other things. Like it was Times Square was a very seedy place. Eventually they cleaned it up, and now I guess they call it they Disneyfied it because there's like a Disney store, and there's all this stuff in Times Square. Blah
yeah.
blah
Now
blah.
they have like Nintendo stores and yeah,
Yeah.
everything.
WWE had a restaurant at Times Square before it shut down. They had it for a couple years. You got restaurants there that, blah, blah, blah. But it's a very touristy place now. But, like, it was not recommended you go to Times Square back in the day. But, so, like, I guess maybe because there is an area in Los Angeles called Skid Row. Like, there is a legitimate Skid Row in Los Angeles that's there's a lot of homeless encampments. It's very dark and kind of dreary now. So I can imagine what 1984 was like. You got a trash man, right? I don't know what time of day this is. Like, I don't know if he's working at night. I don't know. I don't know if
Yeah,
the sanitation workers work at night. Maybe this is like 3 or 4 in the morning. This is, I guess, back then the city was running sanitation, right? Now it's called privatized from Waste Management, like Burtech and all these other companies. But back then the city used to run stuff like that. So maybe they were starting out at like 2 in the morning. I don't. He's out there. There's an electric storm. A very buff and naked Arnold Schwarzenegger appears from out of nowhere. I'm not gonna lie to you. If I had a body like 1984 Arnold Schwarzenegger, I don't think I'm ever wearing clothes. Like, let's just be realistic about this. Like, I'm not putting anything on. Because he was Mr. Olympia like 7 times for a reason. It's quite impressive.
yeah.
Um, he's up at I just had the name of it. What is it? Griffith Observatory, right?
Yes, yes. So I've been there a couple times, Griffith
I've been up there.
Observatory,
Yeah,
and
that
I
is
was like,
legitimately
this looks
Griffith
like
Observatory.
I was like, that looks like Griffith Observatory, but of course it looks a little different back in the day.
Yeah, and they had gates and various other things. Now you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
park
that's what
almost like
shocked
right up
me.
to it. It's a little different now. You have a very young Bill Paxton, right, playing one of your punk guys there. They see Arnold
Really, I didn't notice
Schwarzenegger.
it was him.
That is a young Bill Paxton. Um, Arnold Schwarzenegger beats the hell out of two of them. Or he comes up and he's like, "Give me your clothes." Or they start talking to him. He can only kind of repeat back to him what they're saying.
Yeah,
So he tells them, "Give me your clothes." They break out some switchblades, beats the hell out of two of them, puts his arm through one of them and like pulls his heart out, pretty much Mortal Kombat style, and gets the guy's clothes. It's amazing because the guy just happened to be the same size as Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like
yeah,
how
I know, I know.
as luck would have it, right? Um, there's another electrical storm in another part of the city. Another naked kind of buff guy goes out. Then there's police chases. He sees a homeless man. He steals his pants. Glad he put on some pants first. Steals a homeless guy's pants. He gets chased by the cops. He ends up in some sort of mini mall. Steals a trench coat.
Yep. And shoes. I like what
Uh,
he did too with the shoes. He like put them up to his feet to see if they would fit.
that is one of the most realistic things.
Yeah,
Like he's just like, okay, let me just grab a random pair of shoes and like, oh, these fit. He even if I'll buy that. Maybe the first ones fit. Maybe they're just slip-ons, right? The first, which they weren't slip-ons, they were Nikes with like a with
yeah, very.
Velcro. Which I don't
Yeah,
think Nikes were just thrown in a random bin like that back in 1984. But whatever. Uh, but yeah, like he grabs them and he's like, "Oh, will these fit me?" Yes, yes they will. Okay, I'll take them. Like that's one of the things I noticed too. Like, wow, that's actually kind of smart and great that he did that. He manages to escape from the cops. The cops manage to leave one of their cruisers open, so he steals a shotgun, and then he's just wandering through the streets of Los Angeles. He ends up at a phone book, or yeah, he ends up at a phone booth, opens up a phone book, where he's looking for Connor, Sarah. But there's three in the phone book. So he tears the page out and he's gonna start searching for Sarah Connor. Sarah Connor is our heroine, I guess. She's our main character. Um, let me say this. This might be the most 1980s movie I think I could ever see from everything. And obviously this was done in '84, but the music, the clothing, the big hairspray for Sarah and her roommate there, the Walkman, like everything
Yeah.
about this is like this is peak. All they needed was like a greasy businessman in a suit, and that would have just been like peak 1980s. Like if they would have had Michael Douglas from Wall Street pop up in there, that would have been the most 1980s thing you could ever imagine. Uh, we see Sarah on her little Vespa, no helmet. They probably didn't have helmet laws back in the day.
Yeah,
Uh, she,
really.
she goes she goes to work at some little burger joint. Sees a waitress. She's having a rough day, unfortunately. We go back to Arnold, our Terminator. He pulls a guy out of the phone booth, looks in the phone book, sees same thing, looking for three Sarah Connors. So he starts searching. Gets to the first one. It's an older lady. Once he identifies her, she says yes. He just busts open the door. Oh, before that, he goes to a gun store, knows his weapons, obviously, takes some guns from it, shoots the gun store owner, and then leaves with the guns. Then he ends up with this massive, like, gun with a laser sight on it, right? And he ends up
Yeah.
shooting the first Sarah Connor. And then eventually he ends up shooting the second Sarah Connor. We get two cops. One of the policemen kind of recognizes that, hey, there was a Sarah Connor that was killed earlier today. They get something from another precinct, which maybe in LA was realistic, but if you listen to stuff, you find out back in the 80s, that wasn't totally realistic because different precincts didn't always talk to each other about stuff. Neighboring jurisdictions didn't talk to each other a lot. And that's how a lot of serial killers ended up kind of going on their sprees between like the 70s and 80s because there wasn't a lot of communication between all these precincts and departments and things. And a lot of times, if like murders happened in one area or something was happening, they tended to keep that information to themselves. One, because they didn't want to panic people, and two, they wanted to be the one to break the case. Like they didn't want to give that information to, Sergeant Smith over there, and then he finds out, he breaks the case and captures him, and he gets all the glory. So I don't know if that's kind of realistic. Maybe for the LAPD it was. Whatever. Uh, they kind of put together that like, hey, this is the second Sarah Connor that's been killed, and if we look up this information from what's in the phone book, they've been killed in the order that they're in the phone book. So there's a third one. We got to find the third Sarah Connor. We believe her life might be in danger. Pretty good on the cops. I'll give them credit for that.
Yeah, they picked up on
Uh,
it pretty quick, I guess.
I don't know how quick they would actually pick up on that in the 1980s.
Yeah, I know.
Because let's be realistic. The police were doing the best they could in certain circumstances. Like, I'm not going to say they weren't. But, once again, if you start going through crime information and crime stuff back then, like, could have left a lot to be desired. So, some stuff may not have always been picked up pretty easy. Um, One of her waitress friends from, one of Sarah's waitress friends pulls her into the back and shows her that there was a Sarah Connor that was killed. Right? Sarah doesn't think that's funny. Kind of get that. Don't think it's funny either.
Yeah, I I wouldn't think it's funny either. I mean, like, hey, like 80s humor sometimes is like whenever they show like bullies in high school in the 80s movies or stuff like this, they're like, haha, look, somebody died with your name. I'm like, that is not that is not a joke.
Yeah, it's kind
Like
of
what
weird, man. Like,
why are you pointing that out to me? I'm terrified now.
she goes home. She's back home with her roommate doing the '80s getting ready for Friday night date night for both of them. Unfortunately, we find out her date is canceled, so she has to go out alone. This is while she's holding and kissing her pet iguana, which I don't know if that's safe to do. I
Well,
don't,
we
not the
I thought that
holding,
was interesting.
the
I thought
kissing
they'd
part.
come back around, but like it comes around once more where like the iguana is kind of just
Just
running
randomly,
around
yeah.
right before her roommates get killed. But like they never really mention it again. I was kind of confused on why
Yeah.
they even set that up, but
We'll get another animal that comes back around. There's a dog
yes.
or something about dogs that comes back around. It makes sense. And that's a they do keep that thread through the movies, through the series of Terminators that basically dogs can, for whatever reason, in the future they keep dogs around because they go crazy when Terminators come around, these machines. Um, and that's
Yeah,
something that's a common thread they stick through.
so that means there must be a lot of Terminators in my neighborhood because my dog goes crazy when he sees somebody walk by the
It's
door. So
it's possible. You never
it's
know.
possible I'm gonna have to be more careful.
Uh, we get an '80s version of creepy phone sex, I guess, from her roommate's boyfriend, who can't identify her roommate and her voice on the phone. Now, granted, this is a 1980s wired house phone. Be honest, I can't remember the audio quality back then. Not like we have now, where we have like HD voice quality with our iPhones and things.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, because
so
phones used to
maybe
always, phones used to always sound like, not in the 80s, I don't know, but like in the 90s, even, like when you hear like what a phone voicemail sounds like on like I don't know, any movie or whatever, it's a little distorted, right? It's a little distorted voice. Uh, Almost like if you record yourself on a cassette tape yourself, it's something
listen.
that's not clear.
Some people wouldn't want to listen to this,
Yep.
but once
Yep.
again, because of what I listen to as far as true crime podcasts, listen to like 911 calls from the 80s and 90s,
Hmm.
and you'll get an idea of what like the telephones in the 1980s sounded like. Like, obviously, some of them can be very traumatic and freaky, so I don't know, find some safer ones. Like, they even had a TV show that Shatner hosted called Rescue 911, where they would like play these calls and then like talk to the 911 dispatcher and then talk to like the person the 911 dispatcher saved and everything. But yeah, no, the 80s phones were horrible. Like, even cordless phones back in the day, if you picked up a cordless phone sometimes when you turned it on, because of frequency, sometimes you would pick up someone else's phone signal and you would just be listening into their phone conversation. So the 80s was just a weird time. Heartbroken Sarah Connor decides she's going to go to a movie, so she goes out Friday on her own. She goes into her Los Angeles parking garage, which the parking garages in the Los Angeles area for apartments, a lot of them still look like that. That is. This was filmed on location in Los Angeles, including the fact that James Cameron did some guerrilla shooting for reshoots and for some of the shoots where basically they were like, all right, we got about 10 or 20 minutes before the cops will show up or someone calls the cops on us. So this is what we got to do. Everybody ready? And action. They would go out, film it real quick, and then scurry off without permits and like having to pay like fees for various things. Quick story: when I went to college out here to get my degree in photography, one of the things I did one time was I've been up to the Griffith Observatory a few times, and they have security guards out there. If you go up there and they're pretty strict about going up there with cameras. So if you go up there with obviously it's a tourist destination, so some people will go up there with like uh like I had a full frame DSLR. But because I had a full frame and a rather large DSLR, they asked me to leave one time because like you don't have a permit to like take pictures up here. But I'm like, there's like 15. I'm like, what about this guy and this guy?
Right.
But yeah, so they're like in the Los Angeles area, like these, it's known like because you have to get permission and like you either not only permission as far as waivers and things and contracts, but like you can get paid for having your location used. So uh, apparently that was still going on in the 80s, so they did a lot of guerrilla shooting back then. We see James Reese, our other naked guy, or no, I'm sorry, I think it's Kyle Reese.
Kyle Reese.
Our other naked guy. Follow Sarah out of her apartment in a big 1980s vehicle. She goes someplace. She starts realizing she's being followed. She's having dinner in like some bar or something. She hears on the TV that a second Sarah Connor was killed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In between this time, this is where we see Lance Henriksen's character and another cop, where they decide to give a statement to the press saying maybe if we put this out on the news, we can get the third Sarah Connor to contact us before something happens to her. Because they've been trying to reach her. They keep getting the answering machine. Like, they can't get a hold of her. Like, so they figure this is their best bet. They send patrols by the house, but, like, because it's the 80s and her roommate is having sexy time with her boyfriend and wearing headphones while they do it. Okay, sure. Like they don't hear anybody knock on the door, so the cops pretty much just drive away. Sarah leaves the bar, recognizes she's getting followed by a dude in a trench coat, which, yeah, let's not make yourself look creepy or, like some weird dude in the 1980s with a long trench coat just randomly following.
To be fair, I don't think he knows what looks normal or not back then.
Well, we don't, because we see he has a flash forward to his time in the future in 2029. We have a few.
It's getting close, by the way. That's getting a little too close.
Yeah, we're almost there. We still got about 5.5 years. But apparently there's a lot of skulls that just get rolled over in 2029 in Los Angeles. There's skulls everywhere. Everybody's kind of dirty and grimy, and there's just So maybe he doesn't recognize it. I'll give you that. So she goes into this louder like nightclub kind of in public just to stay safe.
Tech noir.
Good idea. Like, hey, let's go to a public place, right? Where something probably won't happen to me. She gets to a payphone. She tries to call her roommate. She can't get a hold of her roommate. Once again, it just goes to the answering machine because there's headphones and everything is on a Walkman in 1984. She finally gets hold of the cops. They tell her the same thing. Stay in sight. Stay there. Don't move. She tells them where they're at. They're going to send somebody to go pick her up, right? Don't even go to the bathroom. Stay in public. You'll be safe. Nobody's going to harm you. Which obviously means somebody's going to try to harm her. So Kyle Reese is in there. He's kind of staying hidden. Our Terminator's in there. Schwarzenegger's in there. He comes in. He's looking for Sarah, right? He walks by her, but something happens to fall over on the table, so he doesn't see her the first time. Eventually turns around and sees her. He pulls the gun out with the big laser sight, right? It's pointed at her head. She's kind of realizing, like, oh, crap. This is it.
Well, one thing I liked about this whole scene, though, was there's a moment where she sees Reese, right? And she thinks, like, oh, no, he's here. And then,
he's
like...
the one who's killing the other Sarahs, right?
Right. And at one point, like, she accidentally knocks something over, and she goes to pick it up, and she bends over right at the time that
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger Terminator's coming in and he's looking for her, doesn't see her. Like I just like the way that they did all of that because like she knew to be on edge, but she was on edge of about the wrong
For
guy.
the wrong person, yeah. But she didn't know there was a futuristic
Right.
cyborg looking for her. Reese pulls a shotgun out. He saves Sarah, grabs her. This is where we get the first iconic line from the series, which is said over and over again. Come with me if you want to live. I forgot that line was in this movie, honestly.
I was shocked by that. I always heard it as, like I always hear the
From
audio of Schwarzenegger saying it and
yeah, I
never
remember from
never
Terminator
seen
2.
this. Yeah.
I forgot it was in this one. So she's kind of scared. There's been shootouts and various things. So, but she does end up going with them. I don't know if it's by totally by force or partially by like maybe this is the best way, but eventually she does. Plus, he's got a shotgun. So, like, can you really say no at this point? Probably not. Some car chases involved. Eventually, he explains to her what's going on. That he was sent back from the future by her future son, John Connor, who is the leader of the human resistance against the machines that have risen up and are trying to wipe out mankind.
So
Terminator
one thing I
2.
didn't know, sorry,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
one thing I just want to say is somebody that didn't know anything about this movie, but I knew John Connor was in it. At first, I thought Reese was going to be John Connor.
It's a
So
reasonable
just
assumption.
this is something that just because I was not aware of the rest of,
The
I've never
lore
seen
of
it, but
the Terminator lore.
yeah, but I got like through stuff through osmosis. I was like, maybe he's going to be John Connor because I know he shows up in a movie. But I was wrong, and thank God I'm wrong by what they do at the end of the movie.
Well, I mean, look, anybody who has watched Futurama, right? Great series. I'm watching the revival on Hulu right now. Um, quick other side note. I'm kind of glad that a lot of these streaming services aren't just dumping everything at once. I'm kind of glad
Mhm.
they're sticking to a release schedule now, and like once a week you get a new episode. So I'm getting that with Futurama now as well. Once a week they release the newer episode, which is great. But in Futurama, they end up back at Roswell in the 50s, whenever the Roswell incident happened. Fry, his grandfather, the main character of Futurama, his grandfather was a young man at the army base there, who actually ends up getting killed during that time. And then Fry actually ends up having sweet love with what ends up being his grandmother. So he ends up being his own grandfather, which becomes a running joke in the series that he is his own grandfather somehow. Um,
Yeah, it's what people call I believe this is called a bootstrap paradox.
oh, okay. So as we watch this one and we watch the next one, there might be a lot of time travel paradoxes in here that you can go down wormholes and go on
Hmm.
Reddit and try and figure out what kind of paradox it is and what the meaning of them going back for. Did they go back to prevent something? Did they go back to cause something? We'll probably talk about that in part two. No, actually, we'll talk about that later. No, we'll talk about that in. No, no, we'll talk about it at some point. But did did these did Kyle Reese and the Terminator go back from 2029 to 1984 to prevent and or to help the future, or did they go back to cause what ended up happening in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about that by the end of this movie, right? So
There's part of it
there's
we can't because there's more that gets explained in part two
yeah, well,
from this movie.
I'll talk about it from my perspective at the end of
Okay,
this movie
I was because there
because
is
yeah,
in part two there's a big explanation of something,
okay.
and then it's like, oh, okay, but yeah, okay, so uh, he's kind of explaining this to her, right? She's gonna be the mother of the child who's gonna lead the resistance in the future. Now, let's say hypothetically, this was a little bit different. Let's say a female, or let's say your wife came back from the future,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say your who would end up becoming your wife came back to you from the future and told you that you were going to have a child that was going to be the savior of humanity, right? After this shootout, after all this weird stuff that happened, and maybe there was another Jordan, there was like two other Jordan Wiegans that got killed as they were looking for you, and you were number 3 on the list. And she explains this to you, and she's trying to explain to you that, yeah, you, like, I have to keep you safe because you're going to have the child that's going to be the savior of humanity for the future. Can't let anything happen to you. And the guy that's hunting you is not a guy. He's a cyborg with human skin on the outside of him that is trained to hunt and kill us. What is going through your head?
Good question. As a time travel aficionado, I think I'd believe it. I think I'd believe it. Especially with just um everything I had just seen and stuff in it. But also I think with how detailed later on Reese gets with this stuff, with the how you can travel, why you're naked stuff showing up, and why all that kind of stuff. He has like real answers for that. I'm like, that takes a lot of detail to like lie about. So I think I
Either
would
he's
I think I would believe it.
either he's totally, you might have to beat this out. Either he's totally batshit crazy, or like he's 100% like this is true, right? Like like you said, the stuff that he talks about, the detail he goes into, like there's no way, like you can't just randomly make that up on the spot. Like the only way you can is if you're totally bad insane. Um, we will revisit this particular conversation again, and I will ask you again when we do part 2 of what are your thoughts if you are a certain character and all this gets dumped on you, because this happens in Terminator 2 to a different character from a different perspective. And quick spoiler, Linda Hamilton does some sort of like voiceover for it, and she says he handled it pretty well, considering. Which, and as you're watching it, you're like, yeah, I don't know how else he can really handle that. But so,
That's interesting.
uh, like we will have this conversation again in a couple weeks. Eventually, some other stuff happens. There's a shootout. They get captured by the police, right? So they get taken down to the station. Linda Hamilton's there, or Sarah Connor's there. They're happy that they have her safe, right? There's a psychiatrist who we will see again in future. This guy comes back in like
I just
future
got
movies.
spoiled by that, yeah, because I was looking to see if I knew him from anything else, and it shows that he's in the next two.
And his character arc is great in the next two. Like, trust me when I say this. Like,
Okay,
when you see him in the next two, you kind of recognize him. You're like, oh yeah, that's the dude from the first one. And then with everything that happens, you're like, what the hell, man? Like, he's got a good arc. But I'm glad they brought him back for the following two movies. Uh, so then they bring in a psychiatrist because once again, this guy's talking about he's from the future. He came back to save Sarah Connor because later on down the road, the machines become self-aware. Or I don't know if they talk about being self-aware until part 2, but the machines try to take over the world and they're hunting humans down. And like you said, he goes into like this great
they kind of
detail of
became
why.
self-aware. He does kind of mention that like they realize that like after they won a war or something, right? That like all of humanity was the problem and not just the humans they were fighting against, and that they were taking them all out. So
Yeah.
yeah, they kind of allude to being.
Well, they actually bring up like self-awareness and everything else, like the AI that we have now. Like they actually bring up like self-awareness and stuff in further parts. So I'm trying like to not kind of throw these other ones in here because it's kind of confusing a little bit. I haven't watched this one in years, but so yeah, and he's talking to a psychiatrist, and it's like they have it on videotape, and the psychiatrist is thinking like, I'm gonna make a fortune off of everything I'm gonna write off of this dude, because this is absolutely like, as from it. if this were Seinfeld, it's gold, Jerry. It's gold. Like this would be just insane. And this guy sounds insane. Like think it like if you're the cop and you're hearing this, what are you thinking? This guy's insane. Like
Right, right.
you couldn't stay on the force and be like, I think this guy might be onto something. Like you be off the force immediately. Like there's no way they're keeping you on because they're gonna send you for a psych eval and then you're gonna be out of a job. Um, we get Arnold in his trademark Terminator shades because after the shootout, he ends up in a hotel or whatever, and he has to take out his one of his eyes.
Yeah, this is the part where like the effects didn't hold up as much. Where it was like the when
Oh yeah,
you could
yeah.
tell it was
When
like a
the
prosthetic
maintenance guy
head.
was coming by and he like knocked on his door, and he was asking like, "Hey, is there like a dead animal in there?" Yeah.
There's like
So
yeah, there's a few angles of Arnold that you can tell because they had to do the eye thing that like this is like a shell, like it's a
this is a
mask,
rubber
right? On a
mask.
yes, on a
This
thing,
is
and the
a
way it was moving looked stop motion. And
this is
then
like a
whenever he put his
William.
shades on, it was him
Yeah.
again. Yeah.
It was like this is like a William Shatner from Halloween rubber mask that they just made up to look like Schwarzenegger. And there's some other stuff later between stop motion and like green screen that doesn't hold up well. Like I watched this on Max, so I don't know, how I don't know what you watched it on. I don't know how well.
That's how I did it. Yeah.
Yeah. So like yeah, it. But once again, this is also 1984. Special effects aren't that great. They get better in the following years. Obviously, by Terminator 2, the special effects in it are much better. But yeah, for
Yeah, because that's
1984,
'91, and
yeah,
I
there's
just
some
want to
stuff in
shout
there.
out. I just want to shout out some of the stuff I know from Terminator 2 as well as I was watching this special series on Disney Plus called ILM, Light and Magic, I
Industrial
think
Light
it's
and
called.
Magic, yeah. Industrial Light and
And
Magic.
yeah, yeah, but they have like a whole show on there that's like I think it's just called Light and Magic, but it is like about ILM. And it walks through like how they created like models and stuff for Star Wars, and then how they started doing like the Abyss, and then they started doing T2, and like
Yeah.
all this stuff that they've shown. So I saw some of the effects from Terminator 2 through that, but very good series if anybody's looking for something to watch on there.
I've heard that about it, and that's something I probably need to check out because I've heard it from someone else too that, yeah, it was a great series to watch or a great show. I don't know if it's a series or just like a 2 hour show or something.
It's like 6 episodes, I think.
Well, I'm off for like the next 3 weeks. That might be something I
Yeah,
can
there you
pop
go.
in every now and then. But yeah, so eventually, like Terminator, he puts on his trademark shades, is where we get pretty much like the poster from of Arnold. Look, you're looking straight at it with Arnold with his shades on, like a shotgun or rifle in his hand, right, with his crew cut and everything. Pretty iconic poster, pretty iconic look. Like if that came out now and they used that, like every white dude who had a crew cut would like dress up as that for Halloween. Like that would be the it Halloween costume out there.
It'd be
Uh,
Barbie and Terminator,
yeah. Oh
Barbinator.
well, yeah. I'm pretty sure like every couple that can pull it off is gonna be Barbenheimer this year.
Yeah.
Like one dude's gonna be dressed up as Oppenheimer, and the other his girl is gonna be dressed up as Barbie. Like that's gonna happen.
By the
Um,
way, this is coming out after Halloween, so let us know if we're right or not. But we're we're recording this so far in
yeah,
advance.
yeah. We're recording this in advance of Halloween. I forgot. Okay, so he shows up at the police station. He says he's here to see Sarah Connor. Cop kind of brushes him off. She's being questioned. Come back later. Blah blah blah. This is where we get the infamous line. I'll be back. This is the
This shocked
first.
me too. I had no clue it was in this movie.
This is the first iterance of "I'll be back" that
Yes.
became a Schwarzenegger staple, including the fact that in one of the Expendables movies, like he goes to say it and like Bruce Willis tells him like you've been back enough, like so like at some point it became a running joke of its own. Um, Note about that. It's in the script. I'll be back. Arnold Schwarzenegger has a very thick accent. He struggled with trying to say "I'll." He wanted to say "I will be back." James Cameron was like, "No, no, no, we're not saying that." He eventually got it down, and that became the iconic line that we know today. but he wanted to change the line to "I will be back" because he couldn't say "I'll."
Do you think it would be as popular if he had would have said "I will be back"?
Alternate universe, I don't know. Maybe
That's fun to think
it,
about
it
sometimes.
it doesn't roll off the tongue.
No.
It doesn't roll off the tongue as well as "I'll be back." Um, and he's back like 30 seconds later because he crashes his car. Then he shoots up like the entire police station, kills just about everybody searching for Sarah. Kyrie saves Sarah, right? They end up with a little bit of shootout. They end up running from the Terminator. So they're gonna go. They end up going off. They're gonna try. I think they're gonna make their way to like her mom's place in Big Bear or something. Kyle explains more to Sarah on the way there, and they find a hotel. They stay there for a bit. Um, he kind of explains more, and she kind of starts accepting the fate of what is going to happen, right? So this becomes an interesting subplot as well. Of okay, so she accepts the fate that her son is going to be the leader of humanity at this point because she starts kind of bandaging up Kyle, and he brings up the fact that like, oh, you did a good job bandaging me up there, and she's like, that's the first time I've ever done that, and she becomes really into stuff like that here and into later movies because she knows and understands that she has to kind of cultivate that persona and build that character, and she has to transfer that knowledge and that information onto her son John because he's going to grow up to be the leader of humanity, right? So here's where we get another time travel quandary. She accepts, like from what we see, she accepts all this, and this leads down the path of Terminator 2 and 3 and everything else that we know of. But what if she rejects this? Does she still become the Sarah Connor that we know? Or by her not becoming that same Sarah Connor, does that mean John Connor still becomes a savior and leader of humanity's resistance against the machines? Or does he not become that because he doesn't have the mother that cultivates that, puts that into his head, and kind of has to build him towards that? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. That's one of the I would think she can't deny it, right? Like I mean, like just from what we know by the end of the movie, um that it was always set in motion for her to become the Sarah Connor she needs to be. Um but
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 but then
yeah.
this brings up the aspect of, is your destiny already pre-filled, or do you have a choice in your destiny and what happens? Because she accepted her destiny and decided to move forward with it. What if she did not and decided she didn't want to go down that route? It's like when we get to the end of the movie, we'll talk about the Terminator is destroyed, right? The Terminator is terminated. She could have
That's a
tried to
good
go into
line too when
hiding.
when
Yeah,
she says you're terminated, fucker or whatever.
yeah, it's fantastic. But she could realistically try to go into hiding, right? Because I think she even accepts the fact that they're never going to stop trying to come back to erase her because they know if they can take her out, it takes out John Connor, right? So then humanity doesn't have the resistance. But keep track of this. Uh, keep track of this because we'll talk about that again later in part two because we can get weird with it, right? But so they're always going to come after her, and if they can erase her, they can erase John Connor, which means there's no leader of the resistance against the machines. Okay, great. But if she goes into hiding and just kind of stays off the grid, right? Maybe she doesn't get found. Like you see, so she doesn't have to accept this as her destiny. She can change it, but like I don't know. It's one of those things like you can go down rabbit holes and people can argue about it, but I don't know. Or maybe it just becomes a split of the timeline. Like if we go back to like the Avengers when they had to go back
Hmm.
and get the Infinity Stones, and he was like, okay, but so this is where I picked up the stone, and it branches off from here, right? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I guess it all depends on what she thinks is best for her as well. Like in the sense of if she hides and then maybe John doesn't become the man he's supposed to, then she's damning humanity in the future as well. So maybe she's taking it as like a this is what I have to do to save the world now. Um, yeah, it's interesting just thinking about stuff like that because anytime you're dealing with time travel, you start dealing with uh,
Split timelines,
split timelines, but
paradoxes,
also
and
you start
alternate
dealing with
timelines.
like fate and free will, right? Because if
That's
you
the
end
perfect
up,
phrase. I was trying to figure it out.
yeah, like if you end up doing what we call bootstrap paradoxes, which this is what is, right? Like we find out Reese is John's dad, okay? And that he sends him back because she tells him to. She writes this in her letter or her little, cassette tape, right? And what that does mean is bootstrap paradox is like when you get information or when you do something and there's no actual starting point to it. Meaning, if I give you a
So
compass, Casey, and
yeah,
then you go back in time and give me the compass, then the compass has no origin point
yeah.
because I gave it to you, you gave it to me, and I give it to you, you give it to me. Like,
One's
and that's what
one
this kind of is.
one they bring up all the time is like the works of William Shakespeare. If you take all the works of William Shakespeare and you go back in time and you gave them to a young William Shakespeare, right? Did he write them or did he get them from the future, right? And so then it becomes a like when does the creation happen, and did the creation happen during that time, or did the creation only happen because you brought them back? Would he still have you know uh, created those works had you not brought them back?
And this is
And
kind of like
we
the
look,
John Connor thing. Like,
yeah,
Reese
and
comes back and makes John, but he only went back because John had already
sent him
sent him
back.
back.
And then so we can get even more granular with this, right? So as we get to Reese and Sarah, they make love, and she ends up becoming pregnant, and we find out she ends up realizing and finding out that like you said, Reese is John Connor's father, and he never gets to meet his dad. And John also says, like later on, he talks about he never got to meet his dad, and he doesn't speak much of him because he doesn't know. There's also the aspect of, especially when you deal with time travel, everything matters, right? So if you send somebody back in time and you're trying to stop something from happening or trying to make sure something happens, sending someone back earlier or later, then like you have to send someone back at the precise moment because they have to be in certain places at precise times. If they're not there at those times, it can alter the future in many different ways, right? So if they don't send Kyle Reese back at the moment they do, they send him back earlier or later. Who knows what happens? And he has to make love to Sarah Connor pretty much at that exact time because that exact sperm has to fertilize that egg at that time. Any other sperm fertilizes that egg. It doesn't necessarily. It may not become John Connor. It may become Jane Connor. Maybe Jane Connor is the future leader of humanity. Maybe Jane Connors goes to just like work at Target. Like I don't know. But then like you can start like I say you can start getting real granular when you start dealing with time travel because everything matters so much.
Well, you can also think of it this way, Casey. You can think of it as this way: is that John Connor's dad was not Reese, but because he sent Reese back, and she knows she has a kid named John, she's now calling her kid John because she's told that her kid is named John. But that one doesn't hold up as much because we get the picture at the end, which matches the picture from the future. So
Yeah.
everything that led to the events that happened in this movie happened already.
So then okay, so this is one part of we can talk about. We can't talk about another part till part two. Did John Connor send Kyle Reese back to become his father, or did he send John Connor or did he send Kyle Reese back to protect his mother? Right? Because if he doesn't send him back, maybe he's not born. But then because he's not born, he doesn't end up being the future leader of humanity, which means he can't send Kyle Reese back to save his mother, right? So like, okay, he sends Kyle Reese back to protect his mom, to make sure this Terminator doesn't kill her, right? That's the main goal. He does that, but if he doesn't send him back, right? He can't protect Sarah Connor, which means the Terminator can kill her, right? Which means John Connor's not there, which also means that John Connor can't send this. Like you said, this is the paradox that we have, which means John Connor is not there to send back Kyle Reese in order to protect his mom. It like you can go down holes with this, and it gets weird.
My thought is he did it because he knew he had to, because of the audio tapes where she's like, I don't know if I should tell you Reese is your dad, but I guess I'll have to. So you make sure that you send him back. I don't know. Like she kind of spells it out at the end.
Yeah.
She kind of spells it out at the end there, but I think it's kind of like a twofer, right? Like where he's like, well, I need you to protect my mom, and secretly I know you're my dad, and I need you to go through with this so I can be alive.
Like I said, we'll have this conversation again in a few weeks about a different portion that happened during this movie that leads to Terminator 2 and going on forward, right? Because if something doesn't get sent back, it doesn't lead to something else, which doesn't lead to the future. Like, so it's all these things. So they end up at some hotel, right? They get a room. He's teaching her how to make pipe bombs, which I don't know if that's how you actually make pipe bombs. I don't want to look that up, like, because I saw that they had a bunch of it. Like, he had a bunch of things, and from what I've heard, that might be some of the ingredients that you can use to make pipe bombs. I don't know, but I'm not trying to look that up because I'm not trying to become on anybody's watch list of like, oh, Casey McGeorge just started looking up pipe bombs, and now the FBI is trying. Like, no, I'm not doing that. They get to the hotel. We see that there is a large German Shepherd. There's a dog outside, right? Which we talked about earlier. I like the continuity there of they use dogs to identify Terminators. This just happened to be a dog outside, right?
Well, I liked Reese's reaction to it. He immediately put his hand out for the dog to sniff it.
Yeah.
And then he started petting the dog. Because he's so used to, like, when they show that flashback of him in the future, like, coming in, he, like, they have to let the dog smell at you, and he does the same thing and then goes. But, like, here at the hotel, it's like, that dog doesn't know what you're trying to have it do, but it's just funny how that was his instinct.
They make sweet love, which eventually leads to John Connor. After that, all of a sudden the dog starts barking, and everybody knows, oh man, here comes Arnold. This is also, I think, the first time we get the Terminator vision.
Oh yeah.
I think this is the first scene we get. I can't remember if they showed it before this, because I was also
not that I recall. Yeah,
but this is the first time where we get the Terminator vision, which they use in following movies. You've seen it in other things, like they showed it. They used it in Community when Abed was hanging out with like Shirley and Britta and them against the Mean Girls, Hilary Duff and everything.
Yeah, and he has to come up with the mean joke, like when he's dissing them or whatever, that episode.
Yeah, and and so you get, this was like a red thermal vision, and you get to see like stuff on the sides and various things. Oh no, it did come up earlier because he had to pick the response he gave back to the janitor.
Oh yeah. F you, asshole.
This is the first time we see the Terminator vision really in play.
I just like that it gives them like almost, it reminds me of a video game where like you have like the 4 options of what to say and you're like scrolling through, you're like, which one?
Yes, no, sarcastic, good option, bad option. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, some shootout. They escape. Um, they end up using some of the pipe bombs. There's more driving and shootout. They end up in some weird robotics factory. This will come into play in part two, right? They because if you notice, it was a robotics factory that they ended up breaking into in the end, right? So they get in the robotics factory. Kyle starts turning a bunch of machines on to help him hide, which honestly, that makes complete sense. Like, I would not have thought of that. Not only because of different visions that the Terminator has, but because there's so much going on with all these robots and everything moving around, it gives you a better chance to like move from location to location. Because if it's just this open, not open area, but if it's just this area, there's no sound, there's nothing moving, and you move from place to place, he's going to be able to hear you, and he's going to be able to see when something moves. Like, that is pure genius right there. Like, and that just hit me right now. Like, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, you know, this
Uh,
before we get to the end here of this scene and stuff, the Terminator here is reminded me a lot of like a video game, not just the options, but how many times like when you get to a boss fight, right? And then it has the health bar and you take it all the way down and you're
and
like,
then
I
it
finally beat the
spawns
boss.
back up to
And
like
then it
the
does a
second bar.
cutscene, and then you're
Yeah.
like, it's got a second health bar, and it's the second stage of the boss fight, and then you're like, oh man,
Or you
that's how
have
this
it where
felt.
it's like, or you have it where it's color coded, and you have
Yeah, yeah.
like
The red bar,
purple
then a
and then
yellow bar.
yellow. Like the red bar is like the last one, but you have like
Yeah,
purple
yeah.
and yellow, and you like see it go down. Like you see the purple one go down, but there's yellow underneath. You're like, oh man, I'm gonna have to like I gotta get through this bar like 3 or 4 times. Yeah, no, that's
Yes.
perfect
Yeah.
right there. Uh, so yeah, they turn on all the machines and everything, and it's great. Like I said, I never would have thought of that. It's a bunch of fighting. Unfortunately, Kyle Reese doesn't make it through the fighting. He gave his life to stop the Terminator because he throws one of the pipe bombs inside the Terminator, which we think is the end, right? Did this get you where you thought it was? You thought that was it?
It did. Yeah, it did.
Because in all
It was
fairness,
one
like
of
they blew
those.
the Terminator apart.
Yeah, once that happened, I was like, okay, like that must be how you defeat it, right? Because like the fire didn't help, like oh,
Yeah,
like I was like, this must be the way, and then it pops up again, and that's when I was like, man, this is like a video game.
and this is also where we get so. And as we go before, this is where we get it loses all of its human skin, so now it's just in its cyborg robotic self, right? Where it's walking along. This is where we get a lot more of the special effects and visual effects that don't really hold up, but you can't be mad at them because it was 1984 when this was made, or it was released in 1984, so it's probably made in 1983, right? Somewhere in that range, 83, 84. Um, so where like you can clearly tell there's like green screen or blue screen from back then being used, some other weird stuff that's going on. But the cyborg portion itself looked fairly decent. But it's just this cyborg going along. It gets blown up, so it gets blown to smithereens, as they would say. Kyle Reese unfortunately perishes, and then it pops back up, but it's only like its top half torso that's crawling towards
Hmm.
Sarah. And like you said, this is where it would be like. So if this were a video game, I can imagine this would be like Uncharted, where you're driving along and you've got to throw the dynamite and do whatever a couple of times, and it explodes, and then you see the Terminator coming out of the explosion minus its human skin, right? Then you break into the factory. You got to fight inside the factory, and you've got to like he's got some weak points. You've got to like hit a couple times that are glowing. You do that. Then for the last one, you finally like shove the your explosive in there, and you think it's over. And like you said, this is where like the last bar would show up. So we get Terminator crawling after Sarah. She's crawling through. Now, I'm gonna be honest. With all these machines going all on and off, I'd be kind of scared to go under that hydraulic press
Yeah, I would probably have died.
because I would feel like, man, like I don't know where I'm gonna have to go. But I know for a fact if I go into this hydraulic press, like this thing's gonna crush me to death.
Hmm.
But she makes it through the press, and she manages the Terminator coming after her. She closes the gate on it, but it's about to choke her. And like you said, you terminated effort, and she crushes the Terminator. And there's that. She manages to leave. Kyle gets put in a body bag. She's taken to a hospital. If this were made nowadays, this last scene would have been like
Post credit.
this would have been a post credit scene. Like, so she's in Mexico where she's paying 40.3 cents a liter for gasoline, which gas just hit $6 a gallon out here. So I wish I could be paying
Wow.
that.
Ours is like 350.
We're at the $6 range.
Jeez.
Um, she's got a dog with her, which yeah, I'd probably travel with a dog at that point too.
I assume this is the one from the hotel, right? Or did she just go get her own dog?
Possibly, I don't know. Not really sure. I imagine it could be, but you never know. Um, Maybe she went to the Humane Society, adopt, do the right things. Plenty of great loving animals out there at rescues. Go find you a good rescue animal. They'll love you for life. Um, she's very visibly pregnant. She's giving some notes into a tape recorder for her future son, John. Little Mexican kid takes takes her photo, and she asks, "What did the kid say?" And he's like, "Oh, the kid said he took this picture of you, and if he doesn't get $5 for it, his dad is gonna beat him."
Yeah, she says,
The
"Good
fact that his
hustle,
dad's
kid,"
gonna
or
beat
something.
him, yeah, the fact that his dad's gonna beat him if he doesn't get $5 for the picture is not funny. But in the context of everything that's going on and watching this, it's kind of
Well, I don't think the
hilarious.
kid's being truthful here. I think he's doing it to try to get her to pay.
Possibly, but it could also possibly be truthful because remember, it's a Polaroid, right? So it's like you take that picture, it's gone. So you can't be like just buying a bunch of Polaroid film, right? And then, hey, I'm gonna go take this picture, not get any money for it, and then I got to picture some old weird white American lady that I can't do nothing with. And then maybe what? I sell two pictures from the thing, Polaroid film. Maybe I make
Yeah,
my
yeah.
money back from the film. Maybe I don't. So no, I can imagine like if he doesn't get some money for that picture, his dad might beat him. Like that is a possibility. Um, Knowing what I know, uh, later on with, oh, the kid said there's a storm coming. Yeah, yeah, there is. Yeah, yeah, there's a storm coming. There's a shit storm coming. Um,
It's amazing. So this was pretty much written as like a one off, right? Because like the sequel takes like isn't out until 1991, which is like 7 years later. So I assume this wasn't the plan, right? Like I think the plan was this is a one off. The storm could be just a reference to the
the
Terminators.
things
I
they're
don't know if
saying are
it's
gonna happen in
anything.
the future.
Right, right. Like, and then like the picture, like it all kind of wrapped itself up enough where you don't need
Yeah,
a second film, honestly. But it seems like that's that's then after the popularity, and maybe James Cameron was like, I got an idea. Like I actually have an idea for this one, and
but also
they
remember
made
too,
it.
like back then they didn't necessarily make a movie with the idea of hey, we'll get a sequel and we can turn it into a franchise. Like back then they
Right,
made
right.
movies just to make a movie. Like and
Yeah.
if it was popular enough and they could come up with a good story, they would continue on. Like look
Or
at
sometimes they would just redo the same story with a new cast, and it'd be like Weekend at Bernie's too,
yeah.
or yeah,
Look how long it
that
took them
kind of
to do
stuff.
like the other Indiana Jones movies, and because like it took like they were kind of picky about like oh no this isn't the right story, blah blah blah. Like they weren't churning them out now where it's like as soon as one movie ends production, they give them like 6 months, and then they go into like they're starting production on the second one, or like James Cameron's doing with Avatar where he's filming 9 of them at the same time, right over the course of like 2 or 3 years, then they go into post production and they can release one a year for the next 7 years or something, right? Um, so they didn't necessarily like they just made movies make movies that back then, not necessarily
Right,
like,
right.
oh, this is a potential franchise that we can turn into like this, that, and the other thing. So
Really,
some
Star
notes.
Wars was the only one that kind of had like, you know, really started opening up the franchise ability of it. Because like sequels before Empire would have been like Jaws 2, where again it's just like the same story, but they're like, and back then sequels would just kind of be like, people would be like, uh, they were kind of seen as cash grabs and not really like having an actual need of
Yeah,
being told. It would be like, oh yeah, do you see Jaws 4? You're like, nah, not really. Like I'll catch it on
and then I guess the
VHS in a
shark
couple
tries to
months.
eat people again. You know,
Right, right. Yeah. But then like, Empire shows that you can do something
you
without doing the same story again,
you
and
can
then you get more
continue
movies.
the story on
Yeah.
instead of just rehashing the story. You can continue a story from that point. So let's get into some notes here. Cameron devised the premise of the film from a fever dream he had during the release of his first film, Piranha 2: The Spawning in 1982, in Rome, and developed the concept in collaboration with Wisher. 2008, it was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States Film Registry, which I think I agree with that. I can see why it should be. Gale and Hurd worked at New World Pictures as an assistant to a guy named Roger Corman. She showed interest in the project. Cameron sold her the rights for the Terminator for $1 with the promise that she would produce it only if Cameron was able to direct it. She suggested edits to the script, took a screenwriting credit in the film, though Cameron says she didn't know actually writing at all. He said he later regretted the decision to sell her the rights for $1. Uh, so how he pitched his pitch to for this film, he had his friend Lance Henriksen show up early to a meeting that he had to pitch this film, dressed and acting like the Terminator. He put like some foil on his teeth and everything, blah blah blah. He's wearing a leather jacket, has fake cuts on his face, gold foil on his teeth. He kicks open the door to the office, sits in the chair, is acting robotic. He arrived. Uh, Cameron comes in shortly thereafter, right? And then lets him know it's an act, and kind of that's how he gets him to say, "Hey, we can make a movie out of this." Now, if someone tried to do some sort of viral marketing with this nowadays, like the cops are going to be called, like this is going to be seen as like a terroristic act, and like there's going to
Now
be
the most they do with this type of marketing is what you see in like baseball games when they do the like when the Smile was coming out and they just had a whole bunch of people in the front rows like smiling nonstop and looking creepy.
yeah,
Or like the new movie The Creator where they have like robotic head parts. Like they've had people sitting in the baseball games wearing that stuff, acting like robots. That's the kind of stuff you get now. Yeah, kicking down a door in a meeting like that before Cameron is in there to like that could get you like killed nowadays, honestly.
yeah. So initially, they wanted they wanted Schwarzenegger for Kyle Reese, right? Because Cameron was uncertain, and he felt he wanted someone more famous to play the Terminator role. Two people who turned it down to play Terminator: Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone. I think Gibson is coming off of Mad Max at the time. Obviously, Sylvester Stallone is doing the Rocky franchise. And then we have the 80s and 90s where Stallone and Schwarzenegger are tied together for various projects. And then including Schwarzenegger famously like lies and has it leaked that he's interested in, I think it's like Throw Mama from the Train or something, that got Stallone in there to play in a horrible movie.
I
Probably
could not see either of these being the Terminator. So
probably the most well-known fact about this movie. O.J. Simpson was up for the role as the Terminator, but it was felt he would not be believable as a killer at the time. This was before the Naked Gun movies
yeah,
where he was playing Nordberg,
yeah.
and he was on, I want to say it was NBC as a football analyst. And he's doing Hertz commercials, and he was a very popular individual at the time. But once again, I'll say it was believed he was not believable as a killer. Do with that what you will.
Would this kind of be like Peyton Manning becoming a killer? Like because like I was like when I was young, OJ was I knew him
If you
because
go,
of the murder. But like Peyton's in commercials everywhere. He's doing analysts and stuff that like I never I
I
don't know.
knew O.J. Simpson was a football player. Like obviously, I'm older than you. I knew him that he was a football player, but I did know of him as like the analyst on like NBC football games, and he did all the Hertz commercials and stuff like that. So yeah, you're right. In essence, this would be like a Tom Brady or like a Peyton Manning or someone who's in all these commercials, and then you find out he might have killed his ex-wife and a waiter in a horrible manner, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of other bad things come out. Side note, I did not. I initially had one set of thoughts about the O.J. Simpson trial because I was in high school. It was like a senior when that came out, and I had one set of thoughts. Then I read an article in a magazine. I'm not gonna mention magazine, but I read an article in a magazine. I was like, that's weird. And then when he came out with his book called "If I Did It," I picked it up out of sheer morbid curiosity. There is a chapter, and I still have that book. I have that book on my bookshelf right next to me right now. There is a chapter in that book that hypothetically describes what could have went down during these murders. After I read that chapter, my opinion 100% changed about whether or not I thought he did that. That man should be in jail. But
Yeah, by the way, his lawyers not great if they're going to tell him that it's okay to release this book. Like that cemented it in a lot of people's minds.
look, I'm sure he might have got advice about I don't think you should do this. But I can't remember if he made the book before or after the Goldman family basically sued him for everything, including having to take and sell his Heisman, right? So, like any money he gets, because I still think he owes like millions of dollars on the debt of the civil trial where he was found liable for the murders of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. So I think he still owes like millions of dollars on it. So like any money he gets, like they're gonna take most, if not all of it. So I don't know. Like I'm sure they might have said like, hey, this is pretty stupid. I would not recommend doing this. But one thing I learned when I was on a colonel staff in the army, and you're one of his advisors. I was his public affairs advisor. You can advise, and you can give
And they'll still be doing
recommendations,
whatever they want. Yeah.
but ultimately it's their decision to make. But you just have to like, especially if you advise or recommend something and it goes bad, and you recommended the opposite, you have to make sure you have proof that like, no, 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 I said you should do this. You decide to do that, so I got nothing to do with that. Casting Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, according to Cameron, shouldn't have worked. He's supposed to be an infiltration unit. There's no way you wouldn't spot a Terminator in a crowd instantly if it looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Makes no sense whatsoever. But the beauty of movies is it doesn't have to be logical. It just has to have a plausibility. If there's a visceral cinematic thing happening that the audience likes, they don't care if it goes against what's likely. I'll buy that. Um, Other people were suggested for the role of Kyle Reese, including the rock musician Sting. Cameron met with Sting. He wasn't interested because Cameron wasn't very well known at the time. Other people considered for Kyle Reese: Christopher Reeve, Matt Dillon, Kurt Russell, old Snake Plissken, Shrett Williams, Tommy Lee Jones, Scott Glenn, Michael O'Keefe, Bruce Springsteen.
If Sting would have played him, I mean, this could have been really
That's
good.
an alternate reality right there.
Yeah, it could have been a really good marketing time for like Every Breath You Take. Because like I feel like that.
Sting and O.J. Simpson. Imagine the movie we
Oh
get
my
if we had
God, yeah,
Sting and O.J. Simpson,
would not have been a hit.
or Sting
I
and
don't
Mel
think.
Gibson. We would not have Terminator 2: Judgment Day.
If it was
Released
even if
on
it was OJ, let's say OJ and Mel Gibson,
Schwarzenegger.
that movie doesn't hold up in the like like the controversy, with Mel Gibson and with OJ. Like if you had both of
Oh
them in the
my
movie, it's
God!
like,
Yeah, sweet
yeah, that
baby
movie doesn't hold
Jesus.
up.
It's released on VHS and Betamax in 1985. Premiered number 35 on the video cassette rentals, 20 on the tape cassette charts. Its second reached number 4 and number 12 on sales. So, like I said, I remember seeing this along many a Blockbuster wall, or like like your local side corner store back in the day that used to we have a little section for making deli sandwiches, and this is where you can buy like bread and milk. And my mom used to send me with a note to buy cigarettes. And then on the other side of the wall, there was a video rental place. So like back then, you could go to one store for just about everything. On IMDb, it's rated 8.1 out of 10. Rotten
Yes.
Tomatoes, it has a 100% on the tomato meter, and 89 on the audience out of 250 plus thousand ratings. 84 on Metacritic with 21 reviews, and 7.7 on the audience scale on Metacritic out of 1,168 reviews. So overall, it's reviewed pretty well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say about Rotten Tomatoes is we've kind of mentioned it with any of these older ones. It's not as accurate. Like 68 reviews is all it has for critic reviews, which is
From
now
1984.
yeah, nowadays we get 360 like for a big release. So I mean it's still good that it's 100%, but I was just saying that like, it isn't as accurate as probably a newer movie is, if you want to talk about accuracy at all. But like, just wanted to make sure I point that out. It's rare for a movie to get 100% now, pretty much.
There's you know what? On Rotten Tomatoes, I don't know. Let's see. I want to know how many have 100%. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right now, Beneath
Because
Us
I don't.
All does, but it's only got 5 reviews.
Or just in general, like I can't imagine I mean, there might be like 20 movies total. You might get like 5 from like maintenance and progress. There's no maintenance on Rotten Tomatoes right now. How are you Rotten
I know, it's
Tomatoes?
just on
Okay.
there.
It gave you the same thing.
No, no, that's why I'm confused.
Okay. All right. So for me, this, like I said, this is a rare, and a lot of people say this. This is a rare instance of a movie being good, but the sequel coming out and being better. You have like this. Some people will say Empire Strikes Back.
Mm-hmm.
The Godfather and The Godfather Part Two, or one that some will say like the sequel improved on it and is better. But there's not many overall where like a sequel is better than the original. Can you think of any?
Uh, Mine's more controversial. I really do enjoy Back to the Future Part 2 a lot. Um, not I don't know if I'd say it's better than the first one, but like for me, like I watch that one a lot because I like the fact that it does go back and revisit the first one from a different point of view and stuff like that. So, um, like when I was growing up, I always liked the second one more than the first one. Now I just kind of think of them all as three, all three as one movie. So
Yeah.
it's kind of harder for me to separate them. But it's tough, especially unless if you're talking about movie wise. It can be true nowadays with some of the movies we get. Like people would say maybe Winter Soldier, right, over first Captain America movie. But it's
You know
also part
what?
of like 37 of those things. So
Yeah,
it's
because
tough.
it's in the MCU and it all
Yeah.
leads to something else. But I would say, yeah, Winter Soldier was great. Man, that elevator scene might be one of the best scenes in movie history. I'm sorry.
Hmm.
I to this day I still love that elevator scene. It was so good. So for me, I would give this a. I'd say for me this is a 4-star movie. I will admit that there might be a lot of nostalgia in play for that because, like I said, I tie this so much to my childhood and
Hmm.
watching it on HBO on like a Saturday night and watching it on like a video cassette. But this introduced me to. I think I saw this before I saw Conan, so this was my introduction to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then this movie kind of made him a star, and this kind of really jump started his career, and it led to uh, the Schwarzenegger we knew well after this. Um,
My introduction to Schwarzenegger, by the way, is Jingle
Kindergarten
All the
Cop.
Way.
I was close. I was close.
What was the one you guessed?
Kindergarten Cop.
Oh no, Jingle All the Way is like I can't think of another Schwarzenegger movie I probably saw before that as a kid. But yeah.
Um, I mean, I might have given this a much. Okay, so before I watched this morning, I might have given this 4.5 or 5 stars. But watching this now, I have to bump it down to 4. Just because, like you said, there are some special effects that, and it's not their fault. It's just the fact that it was 1984, and they were doing the best they could with what they had. But there's some effects that just, you look at it now and it's like, oh my god, what is going on in this scene? But I can imagine in 1984, it wasn't that bad. So if I would have watched this, if I would have rated this before now, I would have given it a higher rating. But I think realistically, I have to like take a little bit off just because. And then because it made my brain hurt with paradoxes and time travel stuff. And
I like thinking about that though.
oh, we're gonna get into it more in part 2. So let's
So
say you want
I
Terminator.
yeah, let's see what I rate at this. So I will say one of the special effects that didn't hold up as much for me other than the like rubber mask Schwarzenegger is there was a in the very beginning when it's like crushing the skulls and stuff, like I could tell it was like a model. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
that
like a
was more noticeable to
miniature.
me than some other models in other movies and stuff like that. So that any scenes in the future where it was kind of a little bit like a little wonky, but this is a first for me so far out of the movies you've provided me. This is a 4 out of 5 stars.
Wow, you
So I've
enjoyed it.
really enjoyed it. Yeah, really enjoyed it.
I
I'm
am
looking forward to the second one.
surprised. I am surprised because my track record with recommending movies to you has not been good so far. And but that's okay though because like just because two people are friends don't mean they have to like the same exact movie. Like
Right,
you can
right.
have a good discourse and recognize good points and bad points in movies and just be like, you know what, that movie's not for me. That's okay. Like,
Yeah, this
it's
is what number. Is this number 4? We had 13
I gave you Pulp
Ghosts,
Fiction,
Pulp
I gave you
Fiction,
13 Ghosts, and The Goonies. Yeah, so this
Goonies,
is
and
number
then
4.
this. Right, yeah. So this is the highest so far. Goonies was 3.5. This is 4. The other
I'll
two
be
are
honest,
in the ones.
the Goonies surprised me. I really thought you would have liked the Goonies more, but
I
it is
did
what it
enjoy it,
is.
but 3.5 is not bad, right? Out of 5, that's pretty good. I'm trying to be more selective because it used to be anytime I liked a movie, it was 5 out of 5. So I'm trying to be a little bit more selective
Yeah, not
for the
everything is
podcast
5.
here. Yeah, not
That's
everything
like if
is 5.
you go to the doctor and he asks you what's your pain level. Like it's a 10.
It's a 10 all the time.
Like yeah, realistically, like and to you it's a 10, but a doctor's sitting there like, dude, if it's a like I've
Yeah.
seen people with 10s like they're screaming and like they're like
Right, right.
it's not a 10. It's probably like a 2, but they can't tell you that because then like So I'm glad you enjoyed it. I am because
Yeah,
it
and
was.
I put it as a 4. I probably could have went 4.5, but here's my thing too. I'm waiting. I'm waiting because I hear great things about T2. If that's going to be a 4.5 or 5 star, I kind of want to save that for T2. So I went
You
4
can't
here.
be like if this is 5 stars, but this is for like. Like this one's
Yeah.
5, but this one's way better than that. But I already gave this one 5 stars, and the scale only goes up to 5. And you don't want to
Right, right.
retroactively like bump something down. Like, well, now I got to bump this down to like a 4. So I get it.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of being a little more cautious nowadays. But all right. Well, that is the Terminator. So I just a reminder of what we're talking about next week, since we kind of have these. We're doing 2 trilogies here, so this is kind of we already know what's next. But a reminder, it is Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers extended edition. You could also watch the normal edition if you don't want to watch the extended and still join us. There's just probably 30 minutes of scenes that we may talk about, we may not talk about.
Well,
But it's
I won't
on
know what the difference is.
right.
I'm watching the extended edition, and this is my first time. You, Jordan, will know
I'll be able to
if
tell.
there's
Yeah.
a difference. Yeah.
But it's on Max. It's on Max. We're kind of sticking with Max. So that is where you can watch that. You can reach and give us feedback at all of the socials in the video description below or in the show notes, which is all of our socials are there. Yeah. Anything else before we head out?
If anybody listening to this, I would like to know if you're following along and watching these
For the first
maybe
time?
you're watching. Maybe you're watching some for the first time, right? Maybe you've seen some of these before, but you're just following along and watching along with us. Thank you for that. I do appreciate that. But I'd like to hear. I would like to hear some of your thoughts and like. Do you agree with some of our ratings? Do you really think Pulp Fiction is a 1 like Jordan thinks it is? Or
Did I do 1 or 1.5? I forget.
Am I crazy
it was
to
low.
think like the am I crazy to think like the Goonies is a 5-star movie, right? Like because it could go both ways. Like you could be like, that's true because you remember that from a kid. That's not a 5-star movie. And you know what? That's fair. Like I said, most of the stuff I've rated pretty high. There has been some nostalgia to it, but I've admitted there's probably nostalgia behind it. But any thoughts that you guys listening might have about these movies or points, I definitely would like to hear about or know about.
Yeah, so make sure you reach out to us and let us know. All right, well, that's it. Until next week when we talk Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers Extended Edition. Once again, that is on Max, formerly HBO Max. They have both versions on there for you there. Thank you for watching and listening along, and we will catch you next time.
I'll be back.